just like we raised the barn on the prairie.
Should we have Josh with you as a, let's call it assistant?
Yeah, Josh has to be out there so you can hammer less effectively.
We have no target for coming bugs.
Yes, you guys want to pass the microphone down and then each of you can top start with Rex or doesn't matter. All right.
But in previous years, it's always been like we lost a third of the attendance every day. So last previous years too, it's always like you lose 1/3 of the attendance every day.
Looks like with those graphs that match up. Because we're on the same graph for that kind of attendance.
Okay.
Roughly 3 years, just 3 days.
Please welcome the Fedora Workstation Working Group and Paul Frields.
All right, welcome everybody. As we mentioned, this is the Fedora Workstation Working Group panel. I'm Paul Frields. I'm the Fedora Team Engineering Manager at Red Hat, which means that a good portion, not all, but a good portion of the Fedora team works 100% on Fedora and Red Hat. Report to me for whatever that's worth. And here with us, we've got 4 of the members of the Workstation Working Group. Not all of them could be here, but I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Rex Dieter.
Hello, Matthias Claesen.
I'm Jens Petersen.
And I'm Christian Schaller.
And Christian's actually my manager, so if I do a great job on this panel, I'm going to get a raise. If I don't, I get fired. So let's see what happens. So real quick, we're going to have a couple slides. We have the majority of this panel is going to be dedicated to Q&A, so we will be looking for questions. The more controversial, the better, as far as I'm concerned. So the first thing we're going to do is do a quick recap of Fedora 21, and then a quick preview of some of the things that we have coming for Fedora 22 and further. And I'll be looking for a little assistance from our technical folks here to dive into a few of these bullets and explain what we have lined up in the future. And then, as I said, we're going to spend a lot of this time looking for questions from the audience. If we don't get any questions, then I'm going to toss a grenade and see who lands on it. So one item that I wanted to cover before we get started is this item of target audience. And if there's one phrase that I am sick of in Fedora, it's this phrase target audience, because it seems to be that's usually the stop energy bomb that someone will throw into a conversation to kind of stop things in their tracks, and then we can all spend about 200 emails on a thread arguing about what target audience is, and then eventually what the word is. So I wanted to make a point about target audience for the workstation. There's been some misconception that the Fedora Workstation is somehow, in being aimed at developers, is no longer good for people who are not developers, and that is absolutely not the case. The way we think of Fedora Workstation is that it is great for everyone, but it's perfect for developers. And the reason for that is developers are people too. They do a lot of the same things we do. They spend a lot of their time in a web browser. In addition to a terminal, they're looking for the same services that we do. They're trying to interact with their friends. They're trying to schedule meetings. They're trying to figure out when to pick their kids up from school. They're trying to figure out how to use their time wisely, how to be productive, just like you and me. And I do say me as a non-developer because I am definitely not one. If you've ever seen any of the code I've tried to write, you will know that I am definitely not a developer. But yet, I appreciate developers are people too. So again, we're looking at sort of a superset of this audience. By satisfying the needs of what we can consider to be a more or less conventional desktop user, you also are going to hit 80% or 90% of the coincident needs of developers, but it's that extra 10, 20, 25% of work to polish up the workflow for developers that is what makes the workstation perfect for developers. All right, so some of the things that were done in Fedora 21, some of the new hotness that we had, which the press loved. I'm putting at the very top of the list the Software Center from GNOME, which not only was some great work done on that by Richard Hughes upstream, but there was actually a lot of work in Fedora was done to polish up icons, screenshots, descriptions, make sure that we were shipping those in what's called app data, and that allows the Software Center to look really robust for people. It looks like a first-class application center, which is what people are used to on Android or iOS devices. So we really look like a great player there. This got a lot of attention from the press, the fact that we finally polished up a great Software Center. So a lot of congratulations goes to people on that. Of course, we shipped the rest of GNOME 3.14 as well, which was in my opinion, one of the best releases ever. When GNOME 3.0 came out, certainly there was a lot of controversy. There were people who maybe felt that it wasn't quite what they were hoping out of a new desktop environment. But I would say we've come a long way in 7 or 8 releases of the stable GNOME, and not only have a lot of the issues that people raised been erased, but people are now moving to it in droves. In fact, it's one of the things that I think draws people to Fedora from other competing Linux distributions. Wayland was offered as an option, right? There's a lot of work going into Wayland. You can, in fact, run Fedora 21 Wayland sessions now, and things work pretty darn well, which is not to say we're done, but things are moving along. Dev Assistant, if you did not get a chance to attend any of the sessions here that brought up Dev Assistant, it's a very helpful tool. Lets developers set up an environment where they can do work, whether they are working on a Ruby project or a Python project or what have you. This actually lets them get into doing their work faster. So again, this is one of those helpful areas for developers. There are various upgrades to the terminal to make it easier to deal with, especially for power users. And there's a lot more that went into Fedora 21. These are just some of the main hot topics that got a lot of notice. So now Fedora 22, what's coming in the future? There's more work going on. Wayland, I don't know if you guys want to talk about some of this. I've sort of separated this into 2 slides with the hope that my colleagues here will pick up talking a bit about them. So some of the things we have coming in at the low level: Wayland improvements, Nautilus improvements, lib input, and theming enhancements. So I don't know if anybody wants to speak to any of these.
Yeah, maybe I'll say a few words about some of these topics. So on the Wayland side, as you said, in F21, you can try the Wayland session and it kind of works, but there's still a lot of loose ends, and we've been crawling away at closing the gaps, making sure that all the configuration panels that used to use X-specific functionality under X get ported over to Wayland, and in some cases we needed to add dbus protocols between the control center and GNOME Shell, the Wayland compositor, to bring the equivalent functionality over to the Wayland side. And we'll be much closer to having everything working out of the box in F22. And as I said in a blog post a few weeks ago, we want to put ourselves a bit under pressure, so we'll actually switch to Wayland by default very soon after the branching in Rawhide, so that we have enough time to get it in shape and robust enough for F23 and have a good shot at making it the default there. And I think for that we really just need broad exposure now. Everybody needs to try it out and see when it falls over and where we need to fix crashes. So that's going to be a focus for us in the next cycle to get it there. For Nautilus, yeah, I will say that Carlos Soriano, who has joined our team recently here in Brno, has done a great job on continuing some of the redesign work that was started about a year ago in Nautilus. It wasn't really completely finished, so there was a bit of uproar when some of the features were removed and not brought back in new form. So we'll hope to complete that in a way and bring back most of the most needed features that were cut out earlier, so that Nautilus can grow back to be as useful as it has always been. And yeah, maybe that's enough.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, and I guess one thing to point out about the QT enhancements, we understand that obviously people want to run applications from, not just from GNOME and Workstation, but from other environments as well, things based on Qt libs. So the nice thing about these enhancements is it's going to make for a much smoother experience. So when people run an app, if it's based on Qt, it's going to look like a native part of their environment, just like GNOME things, or just like, for example, the web services that we've been talking about. So everything becomes a kind of a first-class citizen in that environment. Some of the higher level things.
Maybe actually, Paul, let me jump in there real quick. Yeah. So as you said, we have a Advaita theme for Qt in Rawhide now, and it would actually be really good if people would try that out and provide feedback, because it's not quite complete yet, and we need to figure out what the most important things are that we need to focus on getting fixed for F22. Yeah, that's there.
Yeah, the question was, what about high DPI improvements in Fedora?
Yeah, I think the base desktop is more or less there. I think the remaining challenge is that we have some major third-party apps like Chrome that we don't control really. That still needs some work. I think in terms of Firefox, that should be hopefully done, because we hope to be able to ship with the GTK3 backend for that, so that should then be able to support high DPI. And then of course we also have some ongoing work in LibreOffice. Yeah, so that I think the status of high DPI.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So there, Matthias, there's also some work going on GNOME shell notifications. Did you want to address that before we move on?
Yeah, I can. As much as I can say about that is that I have Florian Müllner trying hard to implement a notification redesign that has been on the table for quite a while. It's become clear that the message tray at the bottom of the screen is some of the leftovers from the original GNOME 3 shell design, and is kind of like a weak spot of the current design. And we have been looking at how to deal better with notifications for quite a while. And we had a bunch of design proposals in the last year, and Florian is working on that right now, and I hope we can still make it before the doors close. It's getting a little late now to land it, so I'm a little worried that we may have to push that out one release, but we'll see. I'm still holding out hope that we can see something in the next week.
One of the other upcoming features that we've been talking about, and I think there's a proposal being drafted about this right now. Disabled repository support. So one of the problems that we're trying to solve is that when users are looking for certain apps, especially important ones they've heard about, like for example Steam running on Linux or Chrome or something like that, they don't always know how to get the support for those applications installed. So one of the things we as a distribution can do to sort of make their lives easier, while of course not shoving software in front of users who don't want to see it, is by having software able to search for the metadata for that software, and if it's present, they can actually deliver some sort of notice to the user saying, "Hey, there actually does exist a repository for this software. Would you like me to enable it? If you do, click." And if there's any other information we need to present, whether that's a legal warning or, for example, we want to make sure that people understand what vendor they're getting the software from, that it's not necessarily coming from Fedora repos, that we're able to do that. So there actually are mock-ups now for this work. One of the issues we had in the past in presenting it was that it was very conceptual, very foggy. It wasn't really sure how this would be presented to the user. We have some good mock-ups now, and I believe there's either a package in Rawhide
even better than mock-ups. You actually have an implementation.
Yeah,
it's still a little early, but you can try this out if you want.
Yeah, and one of the ideas for this is that, again, there's upstream messaging, but we as a distribution can actually work to decide what we want our messaging to be. So we're already working with Fesco, I think, to figure out what that's going to need to be. ABRT enhancements. I know this is some stuff that Alan, I think, Alan Day had met with some folks on the ABRT team to sort of improve the way that errors or crashes are dealt with in the OS and how that's presented to the user. So it's a little bit easier to understand. Right now, it's a bit of a mess, and it's a little hard to follow, and there's quite a lot of user interaction there that doesn't necessarily need to happen the way that it does. So some enhancements coming there as well. We mentioned the Firefox GTK3 port, so that Firefox really looks more like a native app, and I guess at that point we kind of benefit from the high DPI that we already get in the support that we already get in GTK. Battery life monitoring. So Owen Taylor has kind of got a side project on trying to tweak battery life for Fedora and the ways that we can monitor performance and power draw in somebody's system, and then offer to tune that draw so that people can get the best possible life out of their batteries. Make sure that we are doing as good a job as possible getting people the battery life that some other OSs are claiming as well. Even though Linux is not really far off, sometimes it takes some tuning for that to happen. So we're working on that as well. Do you guys want to add anything? Miss anything?
No, I mean, in terms of battery, Yeah, in terms of the battery life stuff, I mean, I think there's a set of things we're looking at there. One, of course, is to see if there are things we can turn or enable that currently you have to manually turn on by using things like PowerTop.
Right.
For instance, there's a tweak that has a huge impact on your battery life in terms of, I think, the disk controller. So we're looking at making that sort of run only on demand when you're running on battery. It sort of gives a slight performance hit, which is why it's sort of currently not on by default. But our thinking is that if you have that enabled by default when you're on AC and then turn it off on battery, then you probably prefer getting like an hour or hour and a half extra battery life, and have maybe your app start slightly slower. Another big thing we're trying to figure out there is a lot of sort of high-end hardware these days has this thing called an ambient light sensor, which basically tries to detect the light in your room, and then you can adjust your backlight settings based on that. Because I think there was some data actually released from Chrome OS showing that 80% of users usually don't really change their brightness level. So what happens is that you maybe sit one time in a really bright space and you put your brightness to top to see it, and then you never take it down again. And that's also literally costing you hours in battery life. Yep.
Yeah, I think there's one maybe a little smaller thing as well. That's the network, like Wi-Fi card power saving feature, which I think we're also looking at for turning on. As with all these things, it can sometimes cause problems because this power saving kind of requires cooperation between the access point and the network card, and sometimes it goes wrong. So we have to evaluate if it's actually reliable enough to turn it on by default, or if we need to switch to turn it off.
All right. So yeah, there's a lot more coming for future Fedora. There is a URL. You can find it through the workstation page on the Fedora Wiki. There's a task list there where we track a lot of the low-level work that's going on for the next releases. There's sort of a roadmap for future 22 and 23 there. There's also a look back at some of the things that were completed for Fedora 21. And we'll continue to track those there, and we keep it updated throughout the year as we have our bi-weekly Workstation Working Group meetings. You can also find the schedule for those on the wiki page as well. So as promised, a very short slide deck. I think that's probably the shortest slide presentation I've ever done, which I'm pretty happy about. So 17 minutes in, we've got plenty of time for Q&A. So I want to open it up to the floor and let people ask some questions. Go ahead. Okay, so the question is, what does Wayland do for us that we don't get now?
So I'll not sure I can mention all the points, but I'll just point out one big point, that is that the X protocol is really not designed for like separating the applications that are talking to your X server. So every application can see every other application's windows, and it can snoop on the keyboards, and it can, like, there's no security model behind X. And people have tried to like retrofit one on top of it, but that really doesn't work. And Wayland is designed from the start with the idea that each application cannot see any other application. So we have a chance to actually bring some security into between applications on the desktop. That's one big advantage. Yeah, another advantage is that we get to like the Wayland protocol is much newer, so we have a chance to like integrate things that just did not exist back when the X protocol was designed. Like, for instance, as was mentioned earlier, high DPI displays, something that's becoming more and more common. And while we have managed to like implement high DPI support for high DPI displays under X, we cannot really do a perfect job there. So one problem scenario that is very increasingly common, in particular in the Westford office, is that you have a high DPI laptop, but you plug an external display in that is not high resolution, and then under X we cannot really support a mixed DPI scenario perfectly. That's something that we look forward to doing under Wayland. So basically you'll move your window from your high resolution laptop screen over to the external monitor, and it'll automatically like go to like it'll do the right thing. And there's many small things like these where like the Wayland protocol is just a lot newer and it's flexible. We can actually evolve it and adapt it.
That's another question.
I heard that the increased security model means that the traditional select to copy and middle click paste thing doesn't work anymore in Wayland. Is it true, and do we have a workaround for it? Because I'd like to say.
So the question is, in legacy X and Xorg, there's a function to left click and select copy and middle click paste, and the question was whether Wayland is going to remove that function, and if so, is there a way to implement it?
So there's two parts to that answer. The first answer is yes, the Wayland protocol has only one clipboard, which is the traditional explicit copy-paste clipboard, and not the automatic middle-click one. But that has nothing to do with the security model. I mean, you could add another transient clipboard like the primary selection. The Wayland protocol designers just chose not to do that. The middle-click selection is a somewhat like odd feature of X. I would say we all have gotten very used to it over the years, but it's like an odd man out if you compare it to other systems.
Any other questions? Yes. So the question is, how does the work for Workstation impact other desktop environments? I want the mic.
I think a lot of those advancements should help everybody. For example, a lot of the battery life stuff is probably going to be low level, shared among all components of the distribution. So for example, battery life definitely. I think the input improvements, that will be shared, obviously. Wayland's probably a separate topic. That's probably a per desktop thing. So that's probably Workstation and GNOME specific. I don't know, was there any other topic that you had in mind? That was the big ones that I could think of. Long term, there's also some improvements in the Workstation work group about improving packaging of desktop applications, and that will benefit everybody too. So that's another one that I was planning on helping to work on.
One of the interesting things I remember Richard Hughes saying about app data is that actually KDE has been quite ahead of the curve in adopting app data and getting their metadata upstream, right? So some of the work that a few other folks have been doing is kind of bringing up XFCE, GNOME, and other kind of third, I don't know what you would call them, like I guess non-DE specific apps up to that level of integration. And I think overall one of the things that that developers have tried to do fairly regularly is use specifications in freedesktop.org and kind of drive things in that direction in addition to the low levels, so that the specifications can be written to at on the part of many desktop environments, as opposed to being just GNOME specific. And I guess just for my part, I would say that I think that's kind of allowing us to move hopefully at speed with Workstation, right? Because the idea there is we don't. It's in order to focus on a really good experience for the user. We do want to try and drive things forward rapidly. So the idea is to be able to make these things at the appropriate level, so that other desktop environments are going to be able to jump on the bus as soon as they're ready, right? But we can continue pushing Workstation forward as quickly as possible. Stephen, I've noticed that almost every question so far has come from somebody who's pretty involved in Fedora, which I find fascinating. Go ahead. Yeah. What Stephen was saying is he's about to throw a hand grenade. Go ahead. He hasn't had it yet. There's no question yet. He's going to.
So one of the things that Workstation set out to do was ensure that at least among the major desktops that we had consistent look and feel. How has that proceeded?
Yeah, so the question was about consistent look and feel across the desktop, and what is the Workstation doing to try and make that happen?
So I think the consistency and look and feel is mainly important for all the applications you want to run. As I think Christian said earlier, we don't really want to reduce the Workstation to just run GNOME apps. I mean, those obviously look consistent with each other and with the desktop, but there's a lot of really good QT apps out there that people are interested in running, and we want to make those those fit in. And the Advaita QT theme was mentioned earlier as an attempted or in progress effort towards making that happen. And
yeah, I mean, in some sense, the effort is coming in form of that. I mean, I think in the next Fedora release, I mean, we do hope to have the team, but it will still be limited to, I guess, what we call the default team, or maybe the dark team. I don't know if we have any chance of getting the dark variant ready. But maybe almost more important in some ways than this is the next step, which is also getting the accessibility stuff, because that can actually really be make or break for some people using the system. So that we make sure that if you start, for instance, the QT app under the GNOME shell, that it uses the same accessibility team settings as a GNOME app would.
yeah.
Sorry, was there
Go ahead, Larry.
ETA for that? Is that F23 or what's the timeline that you're thinking that some of that's going to get in place?
So the question was timeline. When's this going to get in?
So the Advaita QT theme will be in F22, and as I said earlier, it might not be perfect yet, so we'll rely on getting problem reports that we can polish it up, and the effort to make Qt applications integrate in all the other aspects, accessibility, input methods, high DPI support, what have you. That's going to be ongoing, and I don't know how much of it is going to be in F22, because that's kind of a short cycle, and we're already looking at branching next week, I believe, so not much time left.
Yeah.
I have a pretty dumb question, maybe. You said Workstation and Wayland. What are the other things that maybe won't be working with Wayland at the beginning? Is it things like enlightenment, KDE, or what's the other thing?
Okay, so the question was about Wayland and what would or would not be working with Wayland in Fedora 22 Workstation. Is that right?
So I can't speak for Enlightenment or KDE, whether those environments support running as a Wayland compositor. It's essentially up to them, as Paul said. They go ahead at their own speed. I know that at least the KDE guys are very interested and also in supporting Wayland. And for the Workstation, it's really more the question which applications might not work with Wayland natively. The good news there is that there's the Wayland X server that gets started on demand. Actually, currently it gets always started, but the idea is that we can transparently support applications that do not work with the Wayland protocol, They will just talk to an X server and appear. You won't notice the difference at all in your user experience. And the problematic things there is going to be applications that use X-specific functions, like basically call directly into X libraries to do things to do with like direct rendering or what have you. And we'll just have to identify those and make sure that they do the right thing to get started with the Wayland X server instead. That's also actually a part of why we want to switch the default to Wayland, so that we can find all those problem spots and take care of them.
Yeah. Another thing we are putting resources into is also making sure that STL2 will run perfectly on Wayland. I mean, once again, I'm not sure we're going to get there for F22, but that's definitely an F22 feature to make sure STL2 also can use Wayland. I think the one big item, of course, that's outside our control, but we're trying to work closely with NVIDIA to resolve it and make sure it works as well as possible, is the binary NVIDIA driver, which, of course, a lot of people depend on. So our graphics team is trying to work with the NVIDIA team to just make sure that the infrastructure is in place for them to have their driver support Wayland. It is on the roadmap, but, of course, whether that's next month or next year, that's up to them, not us.
So the question was about screen capture and how we're going to make that work with Wayland.
Right, that's one of the consequences of what I said earlier, that under Wayland, the principle is that applications do not get access to what other people have put on the screen. So taking a full screen screenshot kind of gives you a way to basically scrape out the contents of other applications. So that's not something that's allowed by default. And we have a dbus protocol to do that in GNOME Shell. Currently, we actually had that before we even switched to Wayland. And we have actually discussed at FOSDEM, there was a Wayland cross-desktop meeting where like a couple of people got together to discuss topics around Wayland protocol needs for desktop environments. And one of the topics was standardizing the screencasting or screen shooting protocol on dbus, so we can actually have the screen shooting applications work across different desktop environments, regardless which Wayland compositor you use.
All right, so wait a minute, am I on? Yes. So I have a question. We talked about the software disabling the disabled repo support. Isn't the ulterior motive behind this ultimately to push as much proprietary software into Fedora as possible and deprive people of their freedom?
Yes, that's correct.
If I didn't ask it, I knew Josh would. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think our goal in general is that we just want to make sure. I mean, I think the expectation, as we see it these days, is that people have sort of moved away from expecting that, to find software, you go Googling and find stuff on the internet. I mean, every operating system, be that on your phone or on desktop these days, tend to centralize all their software search and discovery through a software center application. So I think our goal there is make sure that, every piece of software that is available for Fedora from whoever that is and however they have decided to package it. I mean, it's not just, non-free stuff. There's a lot of things that are not really suitable for packaging in Fedora, or maybe the upstream doesn't even want to package in Fedora. Once again, I mean, I think also mentioned earlier that, there are, for instance, some vendors who just feel that it creates more bugs for them and issues if people try to, rebuild their stuff using their own libraries. So we want to just make it easy for them to actually offer their software in an easily discoverable way for Fedora users. So that's our motivation, is that we want there to be a one-stop shop where you find everything, and of course we want to make sure that the messaging is very clear when you receive it, so you don't accidentally install something that you don't like or don't want.
So the question was, is it a Fedora problem to solve if the upstream is not interested in Fedora's guidelines?
I think it's our problem to solve, in the sense that it's our problem to make sure that our users has the best experience possible.
Yeah, I think a lot of us on the working group agree. We definitely want something that, again, the idea is to be great for everyone and perfect for developers.
It's important, right, to represent the actual ecosystem of the world. Like if all of a sudden this particular application is getting 90% of its users from Fedora, they might get a lot more interested in packaging for Fedora. But if they don't get any because nobody knows about it, why would you bother, right?
If they get 99% of the user from Fedora, then it already works on Fedora. They have no interest in using Fedora. People are already using it.
He's saying if you do the work to get discoverable in Fedora, and suddenly there's a huge percentage of their user base is using Fedora, they may be more interested in maintaining it.
Well, or
There's
what we haven't heard, right, is there potentially an advantage. Right? I mean, currently the problem, right, is that there isn't really an advantage to being packaged in Fedora, right? So is there a way that this, in a structure like this, that there's actually an inherent advantage to getting moved over? I mean, if you can't articulate an advantage, like, is it Fedora's role to ensure the kind of packaging practices of the entire world, or is it just to try to guide people that maybe bundling is a bad idea, especially if you don't know what the hell you're doing. So I guess I would lean personally. I would definitely lean towards exposing the ecosystem to the user, the whole thing, and trying to figure out how to make it more advantageous for the ecosystem to participate in proper practices, rather than kind of going the other way of the enforcement of practices before you get started. Kind of like Matt was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
It's really the barrier to entry is very, very high, and then it gets easier. It might be easier if the barrier to entry is really low, but then it slopes up. But we got to figure out what those advantages are.
I have no idea if the camera is going to pick up any of the discussion, but I think that's a really good point that Langdon made, going towards Matt's talk about trying to be, I think, more open to the world of software, which has for many years kind of left Fedora behind in terms of how they view the world and how they view packaging and how they view bundling. You look at something like, I think Steam is probably a great example, which right now has a lot of heat around it, no pun intended, really. And there's a lot of developers who are being drawn in with platforms like Steam, and making that discoverable, making it easy for people to get, is something that works out really well for us. On the flip side, I would say, completely, I guess this is kind of the converse side of the argument that Langdon is making. When it's difficult on Fedora to get things that people expect, especially young, new developers, the kind of blood that we really want in open source, it's very easy for them to pack up their things and go elsewhere. And that doesn't ultimately help us, I think, encourage those people to ramp up into contributors either, because most contributors do start as users.
I can come back to what you were saying. There are two sides to what you're saying. There is the user side, which is making things more discoverable and easier to install, which means from an upstream side, we have solved the upstream problems because this software is available and people can use it in distributions. And then there is the technical side, which is we want to work together to improve software quality and avoid bending for security reasons and all other reasons that we know.
Right. And I completely agree with you. I just don't. It's the approach, right? It's that right now what we need to do is find other ways to encourage that software quality besides barrier to entry. You follow me? Like that's what I'm getting at. It's not that I disagree that the quality of the software is better in these kinds of conditions. It's that flat out barrier to entry isn't working as an advantage, right?
I'm not saying it's as everybody is using my software and it just works out of the box in Fedora. Emphasis to actually improve work on my software to actually make it work on Fedora, since it does work on Fedora.
Right. So I agree. I mean, the only advantage we're offering right now is you are allowed into Fedora. That's what I'm saying. We have to figure out what other advantages we can offer, right? That improve software quality. Or we need to offer other techniques for improving software quality than the ones that kind of are outlined in the packaging guidelines from whatever 10, 15 years ago, right? That it's just that particular advantage is the one I disagree with. Is that barrier to entry one is just too hard, because the upside, right? The advantage has diminished.
So and Langdon, the point about the illuminating the advantages, I think that's one, we've had a really difficult time with that, and that's why Fedora really has had no, I would say not any great success in the ISV space, and that's despite having, people who've worked on it for over a decade now, right? I was actually involved pretty early before I ever worked for Red Hat. I was trying to work with Karsten Wade on some ISV outreach, and it's never been successful because that barrier is just, it's too high for ISVs to want to scale. And because we cannot, really enumerate for them advantages beyond simply, you're going to get better, you'll have better software as an outcome. And for them, good enough is good enough. If they're reaching enough people, they know they'll eventually get to that quality point. So,
or not,
yeah.
and
Or,
they don't care because they're making
right.
money, right?
Right.
Successful.
Yeah, their motivations may be different than ours, yeah.
I think another important point is that in some sense working in Fedora is not really a binary question, right? I mean, there's always working and working. And I guess our hope is that, the easier we make it for people to make their software available to Fedora and also grow their Fedora user base, probably more willing they are to go the extra mile of polishing up the user experience of their application for Fedora. I mean, in some sense, that's a curse of Linux in general, right? Is that we always, get prioritized maybe after Windows and Mac, and in some sense, the more users we can provide to, an application developer, the more time he or she will spend on polishing the experience for our platform.
All right, so I think.
I want to add one more thing to that. So now that you've definitely established that more software available to more users in Fedora Workstation is better, what's the plan for including terminal applications in GNOME software?
We're looking at it. I'm not making promises, but we have discussed this on and off, and I'm not sure if the right answer is to just make terminal applications available. Maybe there's an answer more along the lines of investigating what developers really need to do when they want to install GCC or something. They really want a whole SDK for developing a certain class of applications. So maybe we'll want to look at making a larger chunk of a whole SDK available. But that's very much up for discussion. And
So we're actually out of time. So we'll probably take this discussion more offline. I did want to thank everybody for being here. And again, if you're interested in talking more with the Workstation Working Group, here's the email address. And also, if you'd like to say something nice about us, please, for the DevConf organizers, go to devconf.cz/f/8. That's our panel feedback form, and let them know that you liked the panel. And you can reach us on the list and come check. You can get our contact details on the wiki at the Workstation page. Thanks for being here. Yeah, is ODP okay? Is ODP format? Yeah, LibreOffice, that's what I have.
It's possible to arrange the lights to be brighter here.